We have a special group here in town from a local high school. And so if we want to send up is it 3 delegates? We got 3 delegates coming up to tell us what they think about sustainability. And they're going to tell us where they're from and who. Basically, come on down. And so we're going to have to give you some time to give some quick introductions. Do you guys all want mics? Do you want to split one? We can split? Okay. And so first, you ladies want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Vanessa.
I'm Kendra.
And I'm Link.
And we're from Westwood High School. We're representing Earth Club. Yeah. We came to talk to you guys a little bit about our take on sustainability on fast fashion. So.
Okay, and then is your topic similar to sustainability and fast fashion, or?
It's also sustainability.
Okay, also sustainability. Do you just want to kind of hop into it first, lead us off?
Okay. Without sustainability, our future could be marked by environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social inequality. We might witness the loss of precious biodiversity and as ecosystems struggle to cope with pollution and habitat destruction. Water and air quality may deteriorate, affecting public health and exacerbating climate change. As health resources become scarcer, competition and conflicts over vital commodities could rise. Moreover, economic disparities could heighten as marginalized communities bear the brunt of environmental hazards that limits access to clean water, food, and shelter. Overall, without sustainability, our future would be characterized by a cycle of crisis, short-term decisions that could be sacrificed in the long-term health of our planet and its inhabitants.
Sustainability is a concept that encompasses the responsible use of resources to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It emphasizes the importance of preserving the environment, promoting social equity, and ensuring economic prosperity. Sustainability is crucial because it addresses the pressing challenges we face today, such as climate change, deforestation, and resource depletion. Now, when it comes to fast fashion, the connection becomes evident. Fast fashion, with its rapid production consumption cycles, often disregards sustainability principles. It contributes to environmental degradation, exploits labor, and generates excessive waste. Therefore, understanding and promoting sustainable practices in the fashion industry is essential for a more responsible and ethical future.
In a world where trends tend to change faster than the blink of an eye, fast fashion has become our guilty pleasure. We as consumers find ourselves irresistibly drawn to the lure of affordable clothing that mirrors the latest runaway styles. However, our insatiable desire for runaway fashion comes at a cost. As we indulge in the thrill of constantly updating our wardrobes, we unknowingly contribute to the cycle of exploitation, environmental degradation, and unsustainable consumption. It's time to pause, to reflect, and ask ourselves, are we truly fashion forward, or are we simply taking advantage of our system that thrives on our insatiable hunger for the new?
Today we stand before you to shed a light on a pressing issue that affects not only our present but also the future of our planet. It is an issue that has permeated our lives in ways that we may not even realize. The impact of overconsumption and fast fashion on our environment.
In this era of instant gratification, we find ourselves constantly bombarded with advertisements and trends that encourage us to buy more, to keep up with the latest styles, and replace our possessions more frequently than ever before. But have you ever stopped to consider the consequences of our actions? On average, each person contributes 81.5 pounds of clothing that all go to landfills.
The fashion industry in particular has become one of the largest contributors to environmental degradation. Fast fashion, characterized by the rapid production and disposal of cheap clothing, has led to staggering increasing in the waste of our generation. 85% of clothing is thrown away and ends up in landfills. Every year, millions of tons of clothing ends up in these landfills, where they decompose and release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, meaning 10% of global carbon dioxide emissions is produced by fast fashion.
But it's not just the waste that possesses a problem. The production of these garments also takes a toll on our environment. From the extraction of raw materials from manufacturing process that involves and uses toxic chemicals and excess water consumption, the fashion industry leaves behind a trail of destruction.
Moreover, the demand for fast fashion has led to the exploitation of workers in developing countries. Low wages, poor working conditions, and long hours have become the norm, all in the name of meeting our insatiable desire for new clothes. It is a cycle of consumerism that perpetuates inequality and injustice. Donating fast fashion does not cancel out. This is because the material is so low quality that when consumers buy them secondhand, they are already deteriorated. Although many people express their concern about the impact it has on our environment from the fast fashion industry, they still refuse to make changes in their daily life. In a survey done by the World Health Organization, 78% of individuals feel as if sustainability is important, but only 55% are willing to pay more for eco-friendly brands.
So what can we do to address this issue? The power lies in our choices as consumers. By opting for sustainable and ethically produced clothing, we can make a significant impact on the environment, supporting brands that prioritize fair trade, use organic materials, and promoting recycling, upcycling, thrifting, and normalizing outfit repeating. That can help break the cycle of overconsumption.
But it doesn't stop there. We also must learn to cherish and take care of our clothes we already own. By extending the lifespan of our garments through proper care, repair, and sharing, we can reduce the demand for new items and minimize waste.
Education and awareness are crucial in this fight against overconsumption and fast fashion. We must educate ourselves and others the true cost of our choices, both for the environment and for the people involved in the production process. By spreading the word and encouraging sustainable practices, we can inspire and change in a larger scale.
In conclusion, the impact of overconsumption and fast fashion on our environment cannot be ignored. It is a problem that requires immediate attention and action. By making conscious choices as consumers, supporting sustainable brands, and advocating for change, we can pave the way for a more sustainable and equitable future.
It's my turn. Mine's a little less scripted and a lot shorter, but I hope you also like that one. Mine's really personal too. To me, sustainability is it's my entire future. As a senior, I'm supposed to go to ASU next year for astrophysics. And I don't know, I kind of want to graduate and live in a world where I can study what I want to and do what I want and not have to worry about this constant looming threat of maybe the sea level will be 1 billion feet taller in a few years, or other crazy stuff. Sorry if that was badly worded. I'm a little off script. But if there's not change fast, I'm not going to get to do all that cool stuff. I'm not going to get to work with NASA. Nobody will. NASA's probably going to be dead.
Sustainability is really important, not only for us, but for our future generations, because for me, I want to be able to live in a better environment, and I want to be able my kids to live in a better environment.
Like you said, I want to live in a society where my kids can grow up the way I did. Maybe if that means that we have to return our cups and our forks each time we use them, we have to bring them from home. It would be much better than living on an earth that there's trash everywhere and landfills, and there's trash all over our waters, and there's nothing we can do because in a few years our planet would die, and it would be unreversible at that point.
And everyone can do their part to make a change. It doesn't matter how small. You could like see trash on the ground and pick it up, or like you see a flyer for some like delittering thing and you like call the number on there. It doesn't matter, but everyone needs to do as much as they can for our future, or there's not going to be a future. I mean, they said earlier that by 2100 our sea levels are going to rise by 6 feet. I was born in 2006. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be alive around 2100, and I don't want that. I don't think any of us want that unless you're secretly a mermaid. But basically, y'all got to do your part. Everyone does. It's really important for our future. And our family too, not just me, but like I want to see like my baby cousins grow up. I want to have a family. I want to have kids. I want all that, and I want them to grow up in a nice world, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, it's not easy to come to these conferences and you know, speak from your heart and how you feel. So just keep practicing it. Trust me, it does get a little easier as you go. And there's a lot of hope, though. I want you guys to know that. And so thank you so much for coming and sharing that. So we all got, Brent, you got a mic? You got a mic. Okay, so it was really important that we wanted to, the high school reached out, you know, the Earth Club and their mentor and their teacher, you know, said they were coming, and I was thinking of like, okay, do they want to, you know, come and pitch a little bit and just get some practice? And, you know, they kind of jumped on it, and hopefully we can make this an annual thing for them to come and give us their thoughts, because the youth is really important. Just to think about if they're worried or concerned, you know, we want to hear what they think too. And so it's really important for me to hear, you know, I hear concern in their voice, and I hear their awareness, and I got a brother who's 18, you know, so in their group, and it's just really important that we try to leave a better world, you know, or you know, to sustain the one that we have. And so with that said, obviously, Eusebio, you gave the talk, but let's start with some introductions and maybe your focus in your disciplines within the climate adaptation or the climate space, maybe in general. Jennifer, you want to start us off?
Okay, so everyone knows Eusebio, so that's great. Hi, everyone. I am Jennifer Venos. I am an associate professor here in the School of Sustainability. I study a lot with climate change and human health, but my primary focus is on extreme heat, adaptation, mitigating extreme heat, and what heat does to the human body. And of course, that's a really important part of today's discussion. I also teach a class on climate change and human health here at ASU at the graduate level, and I've studied this since about 2010. So I'm really happy to be here and excited for this panel discussion.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then Brent, flying in from Silicon Valley or Los Gatos.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brent Constants. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm running an effort to remove and permanently sequester gigaton levels of carbon dioxide in the built environment in the form of the aggregate in concrete, which is maybe one of the only places you can put gigaton levels of CO2. We have a plant operating on San Francisco Bay that's taking CO2 from a power plant that puts out about 2 million tons of CO2 a year and powers the city and county of San Francisco, and converting it into limestone. And if you go to Terminal 1 at San Francisco Airport, you're walking across carbon that would have been in the atmosphere, but now it's part of the concrete.
And so we got a lot to talk about here, but one of the, the things, Eusebio, I think it's really important that when you were talking about the green premiums and the green discounts, can you just briefly, explain what a green premium is, and then maybe a green discount?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. So one of the key elements here is that a lot of times when you're looking at green alternatives, right, they usually come with the idea that it comes at a premium. That, for example, we have the let's say, the non-green option versus the green option, and the green option costs more. When you look from a consumer behavior point of view, and especially when you look at levels of awareness, or especially when you look at levels of wealth, you tend to see consumers being able to make those choices. When you look at in more, let's use the word resource-constrained environments, which is especially the global south and in areas where you have, economic hardship, the idea of saying, hey, you're going to go into a green premium is much harder. Even when you're looking at organizations, companies that, you're talking to people that are responsible for the bottom line of it, and you say they need to see the translation of that premium into value. However, if we push, innovation in a way that we can actually offer green alternatives or sustainable alternatives that actually are more cost effective than the non-sustainable alternatives, that is even a bigger driver for actually a widespread adoption of it or a widespread implementation of it. So it's about thinking, beyond the idea that we need to be only sustainable when people were willing to pay a premium. That's a quite, when you look at the world, that's about a privileged position to say that I can afford that premium, right? Or even say, I would love to get the sustainable, but I cannot afford it, right? Now, if you think about innovation on the sense that how can we actually be thinking of getting so efficient on this that we can actually offer a green discount. Like we look at the limestone and extraction of limestone versus, injection and so forth, to the point that you can build that at scale. You actually have a much more stronger value proposition that even in markets that are more cost sensitive, you can actually push that widespread use.
Yeah, that's a great point of, sustainable, when we talk about equitable solutions. It's like how do we make these solutions reachable and experienceable for everybody? One of the things, Jennifer, when we talk about extreme heat, like we are in the hottest city in the U.S., what does the extreme heat do to us, here in the desert?
I feel like everyone in the audience probably has a good answer for this, how bad you can feel after you've been exposed to heat for too long or had some high school sporting event or activity outside in the heat. It's not good for your body. And of course, if you expose yourself to heat for too long, especially doing activity, you can end up in the hospital with heat stroke. You can end up with dehydration and issues with your kidneys. And we do see this in athletes or outdoor workers who are continuously exposed or who are exposed unfairly to heat. And so I think a lot of this is just thinking about, what do we know? What are we facing today, or have we faced for 20, 30, 40 years? We live in Phoenix, it's a hot place, but now what are we seeing more of? And we're seeing more heat. And why is that? It's because of how we build our cities, and it's because of the changing climate. And so what can we do about that in thinking about how do we adjust to this change in the environment that we're seeing, both from a physical infrastructure standpoint or from a technological standpoint, or even physiologically, our bodies are really smart and adapt to the heat through acclimatization every summer. It's amazing. And we need to recognize that that is an important process that occurs. And the last thing I'll say is we are all very smart people as well, and our bodies do know how to behave in the heat, or hopefully we do. But the more we can understand the impacts, have good education on the impacts, know what to look for in ourselves or our loved ones and our friends, then the better we can actually adapt to hot days and know what to do and hopefully have the coping capacity to do that. So I think there's a lot that comes into play when, yes, it's not good for the body to be overexposed, but it's 100% unnecessary for anybody out there to be overexposed and die of extreme heat. Because we're smart people, we can be dealing with this and helping our neighbors and figuring out this situation in our city and in lots of other cities around the world.
Yeah, that's really important to think of those strategies and obviously avoid exposure. One of the things maybe for Brent here, as a serial entrepreneur and with your work in sustainable technology, specifically in the carbon capture and utilization space, how can such technologies be scaled up to make the significant impacts we need to combat the climate change, and what role do they play in the broader climate action strategy?
Well, I think in carbon utilization, probably one of the key things is going to be government procurement of materials. So governments are using their purchasing power around the world as opposed to being incentivized to do something because of some subsidy or credit. Because most of the world will never and does not have subsidies or credits for capturing CO2. And when those subsidies go away and methodologies have been built based on those subsidies, they'll just go away. And that's been seen a lot of times where subsidies to remove carbon and do something with it have been instituted, processes, businesses develop around them, and then the subsidy goes away. Now, if it's a solar farm, that's great, because when the subsidy goes away, you still have a solar farm. But if you're just capturing CO2 like a waste and disposing of it underground just to get a subsidy, and then the subsidy goes away, there's nothing left. You know, you've built a whole infrastructure around it, which, you know, is unfortunately the sort of the direction the rich countries are going right now. But there's the other 90% of the world that has carbon and needs a sustainable, both economically and technically sustainable way to mitigate CO2. And something all governments have, rich and poor countries all over the world, is they're buying lots of infrastructure, lots of concrete, lots of materials. And if they can specify that and use their power of procurement, then we can really, it's not just a few rich nations that can afford to mitigate carbon and think they're doing a lot, even though 90% of the world's still putting out lots of carbon. It's all the countries in the world. And so I think government involvement in the procurement of carbon sequestered materials is going to be a key part of being successful.
And maybe just a follow-up on that, you know, with California, you know, being such a, you know, a big economy, and, you know, really we look to lead, you know, kind of by example. What are some of the, you know, the challenges that you might see with, you know, the government's procurement or buying power, you know, being engaged or activated, you know, to really catalyze this innovation?
Well, you know, a lot of things involve the whole government procurement process, which is really against innovation. And so if you're really going to come out and use that whole process to mitigate a lot of CO2, you're going to get right into the process. We've recently had some laws develop on how in the procurement process for large quantities that they will specify low carbon concretes, for example.
Okay. Yeah, it's such a interesting, you know, field, obviously emerging carbon capture and utilization. You know, like when you use it for things, like you said, put it into cement, that's one thing, but, you know, I'm from, you know, North Dakota, where we burn off, you know, our natural gas that comes up with our oil. You know, so it's on one hand, we're talking about carbon capture and utilization, and then on the other hand, we have thousands of flares, you know, burning, you know, methane and natural gas. So it's kind of a conundrum in my mind, you know, on, you know, the government's role here, like to where I hear DOE talking about CCUS, you know, quite frequently, but then I'm like, the industry where I'm from is like, well, why don't we do it here? You know, let's just let's capture this, turn it into liquefied natural gas, sell it to Europe. You know, and so there's some big, I guess, policy challenges, you know, that I think that we're facing. And that might lead into a question for you here, Eusebio, is given your extensive background in digital innovation and climate tech, you know, how do you envision the role of digital technologies accelerating climate adaptation and actions? And what would you say are the key challenges of integrating these technologies?
So I'll use actually the example that Brent actually was talking about procurement. We have a group here at ASU led by Nicole Darnell, which I work with, that is actually on public procurement and sustainability. And we end up doing research with different levels of government in terms of their procurement managers and trying to understand a bit how they are actually procuring materials, but also the whole ability of carbon accounting and so forth, right? And you have issues that goes beyond policy, which actually is, in government, how the procurement process occur, how the technology adoption occur. A lot of times is not seen as a strategic element, right? It's seen as basically almost like as the technology is being phased out, a matter of survival and whoever gets the contract. So there are elements that are institutional that goes beyond, when you see right now in procurement, particularly in public procurement, you see a misalignment sometimes into the policy versus actually the readiness of the different levels of government in terms of being able to leverage the existing technologies that are out there to have more sustainable procurement and so forth. So going back to your question, when I look into this, and this goes back exactly, when Jennifer was talking about all those effects, the first thing that I see technology or information technology, digital innovation, is the ability for us to really understand what's going on, right? We cannot be in an environment that I say that we are data rich, information poor, knowledge miserable, right? That's a big challenge. So by having the technology, it doesn't mean that that data is actually transformed into information, is actually actualized into knowledge. So the first thing that you can think about is using the ability to create digital twins, to enhance decision making, to actually engage different, we think about when heat's going up, where are the locations, what sort of materials, right? For example, yesterday I was talking to people from Amazon Web Services, and they were talking, for example, on water resilience, right? And then suddenly you get saying, okay, replace your natural grass for artificial turf. But then there's now a lot of issues around how it creates heats, how that actually creates, microplastic that actually dumps into water. But how do we know that? Are we going to wait another 10, 15 years when then the policy will say, replace your artificial turf with rocks or something like that, because then we found out how much that has increased, heat and so forth. So the more we're able to know, and that's where I think digital innovations has this ability to do by the ability of basically capturing what exists into the physical world and translate that to data, which should be translated to decision making. That makes a massive role in terms of us understanding, and with that understanding, having consequential action to be able to transform. The second element is exactly that. One is when you think about the network effect and the pervasibility of the digital ecosystem, allows you to connect with different stakeholders. For example, a company called Kogo right now is linking financial data from your bank account into actually estimating your footprint, so you start to actually understanding how your consumption, you went and you put gas and you went to the supermarket and you bought stuff and you did this and you did that. You start to understand your impact into the environment, and then you start to do, things. But at the same time, it can work in connecting, for example, finance. Like, hey, your energy bills are this. Here's an option to actually get solar panels. Right, and there you go. So then you can also, create a much more holistic and interconnected ecosystem. So I think when you think about digital, is this ability to quantify, verify, and engage, and create, a level of understanding that we can really create the action that is necessary. So it's almost like the glue or the backbone that can facilitate our actions.
But it's really important that we have to use the big data that we have to gain an understanding and move into comprehension, and that's probably the biggest challenge right there.
And again, the issue is that if you assume that by embedding technology this will happen, you're wrong. That's why you need to actually have this alignment of how that data, of course there's elements of how this data is being captured, who has access, how it's being used, all these elements of, that you have to think at the societal level, where there is also the paradox of, that what is actually good for such and such organization may be not good for the citizen or the consumer. So we also have to think about those elements. It's not that everything is positive. So, but by thinking through, using what we call responsible innovation frameworks, you're able to actually get it right. Your chances of getting it right are much higher. The problem is a lot of times, you're looking at very short spans. And once you get into policy, a lot of times, you're thinking about the next election. So a lot of times, say replace and I don't know how Jennifer feels about replacing with artificial turf, but that was an example that we were talking about with the AWS yesterday that showed, the lack of really understanding beyond, the immediate effect. So you solve the water consumption issue and you create another one, right? And then you get into a vicious cycle that you create new technologies to solve the problems that the previous technology created. That's not a good idea.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And that kind of segues into a Jennifer question. As an expert in climate science, what are the most pressing environmental challenges, here in maybe the Phoenix Valley that require immediate adaptation strategies? And, how can interdisciplinary research contribute to those?
Great question. I feel like a lot of the people in the audience would agree with me on this. Water's a big one, heat's a big one, and then a lot of times when we talk about climate adaptation, it's not about what we need to do in 30 years. It's about what we needed to do 30 years ago. It's about the fact that we have had problems with heat and water for a long time here, and don't need to be making any more delays in changing. And I'm not saying we're not doing anything. There's a ton we're doing about heat and water issues in the valley. And they are very intrinsically connected as well, such as the artificial turf example, which I'd be happy to talk more about too, around heat mitigation, because I feel like we're talking a lot so far in the panel about climate mitigation, so thinking about CO2 mitigation, greenhouse gas mitigation, versus just humans and the process of adjusting to the climate change we're seeing and the commitments we've kind of committed to for quite a long time just due to the long lifespan of greenhouse gases. So in terms of, and I might be going off track a little bit from your question here, but in terms of some of the heat mitigation, or which can also be classified as climate adaptation, so what are we doing to try and mitigate heat? We know the city of Phoenix has a whole heat office now, the first ever publicly funded heat office on heat response and mitigation. So a big piece of that is response. How do we make sure the most vulnerable populations in our cities are protected when it's hottest out? And then mitigation, how do we try and bring the levels of heat down that we experience in the city, especially where people are? And it's not just about air conditioning, because everyone can't have air conditioning, especially if we're thinking from a big global perspective. So there's a lot of efforts going on, and a big piece of that is just community connectedness, working across sectors. So your interdisciplinary question, I would say let's move to cross-sectoral, transdisciplinary work, where it's not just about saying, okay, I'm going to work with another discipline on my research here, but I'm going to reach out and work with the cities. I'm going to reach out and work with the communities and make sure that the research I do here is meaningful in a community-based framework. And that's where you can start to make a lot more traction in the adaptation space today that will last for long time periods, hopefully, if you do it right in the first place and work with the community in the first place on what are their needs today and what do they see as their needs in the future. And it could be as easy as we want more trees at our schools for our kids so that when it's hot out, they can still go outside. So yes, we go out and we plant trees at schools, and that's what they tell us they want, and that's what's going to help them for a long period of time and just actually get better and better and better over time. But then we have to think, what about the water? Trees can't grow without water, so what trees are adapted to drought situations, right? So we're planting drought-tolerant trees, using more efficient water irrigation systems, and making sure that that shade is put in a place that will actually benefit the kids. So that's just one example. I could also talk about reflective pavements in terms of city procurement of types of roads they're putting in to attempt to mitigate heat. So, but I'm going to leave it there for now so I don't take too much time.
No, we really appreciate that. There is a lot that is being done, and you know me and a small team are working on a short film called Sweltering Saguaros, and so we went to DBG, interviewed their chief scientist Tumamoc, you know, down in Tucson, and there's a combination of challenges, not just extreme heat. Actually, one of the biggest impactors for the saguaros is actually an invasive species of grasses. And stinknet and buffalo grass are actually from the savannas of Africa, and they're fire adapted. So they'll literally creep in, you know, grow in, literally ignite, and then damage the saguaro, and you know it ends up falling down, and they just kind of take over. And so a lot of people don't really realize that that's one of the bigger impacts on the saguaro. But maybe for you, Brent, as there's actually a lot of talk about California, you know, here in Arizona and at ASU, and obviously you're at one of the, or near or in one of the hubs, you know, for innovation. What has some of the conversations been about, whether it's climate adaptation and particularly for us, climate action, you know, and how do we help these conversations, you know, move along? I guess in your experience, you know, working in the big industries.
Yeah, it's really a difficult time because, you know, the size of the problem is huge, and most of the adaptation efforts are important, but don't match the size of the problem even remotely, you know, in orders of magnitude. So the state of California is doing a broad range of things, you know, like take the low carbon fuel standard that we have. You know, you can capture CO2 anywhere in the world and get a credit for doing that. You know, the state of California benefits, but the actual amount of CO2 mitigation we're talking about is probably unmeasurable. It's so small, you know, on a global basis. And you know, that's the real disconnect that's happening right now. Is we get excited about kiloton and even megaton mitigation levels, but humans put out over 30 gigatons, and there's 1,000 megatons in 1 gigaton. And you know, if you take all the efforts in the world right now, you're a few tens of megatons, and so even with you know, federal legislation like 45Q coming through, creating all this effort, we're still in the tens to maybe hundreds of megatons, you know, and not by 2030, by, you know, 2040 or 2050. A recent trend has been a lot of excitement about direct air capture, and you know, that we're going to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, but the actual amount of CO2 possible, the IEA says by 2030, is maybe about 80 megatons if everything went well. You know, which isn't going to really even be something we can measure. It's such a small amount, but it's costing billions and billions of dollars. So, you know, I think people are realizing there has to be a real directed effort toward large solutions that will really make a big difference quickly. And a lot of the stuff we're doing is great, but you know, we are trying to lead in a lot of our policy, and we're seeing that picked up, but it's just not got the impact, the kind of impact that it could have by the time it gets implemented.
Yeah, do you feel is Blue Planet Systems, are you working at gigaton scale, or?
Yeah, I mean, we believe that the real issue with carbon mitigation, and there's so many efforts going on, is that, you know, they're all sort of in the kiloton to megaton level. And, you know, I'll mention this in my talk at 5, but almost all of Earth's carbon is already sitting in limestone. Like over 99% of all the carbon on Earth is in limestone today. And limestone is other than water, the most moved quantity in the world. It's the most moved commodity in the world. And that's the problem with a lot of the efforts is, you know, incentives are given to capture CO2 without taking regard to what you're going to do with it. And so, for example, we're contacted literally once a week by some recently funded direct air capture company. You know, there's billions of dollars going into this. And they're saying, well, can you take our CO2 for us and do something with it? Because we don't have a place to transport it or inject it. And by the way, we can't share the credit with you because that's the only way we make revenue is because through this subsidy. You know, so it's like giving kids drugs or something. You know, we're stimulating these businesses that don't make any sense at all, that won't be sustainable, using billions of dollars that could be used on something that actually will make a difference right now. So it's, you know, sort of massive miscommunication, I guess. You know, I always tell my students that it's one thing to have a qualitative understanding, but until you get a quantitative understanding of what really needs to be done, it's sort of meaningless. And, you know, the national policies we're putting in place with the intent of mitigating lots of carbon, if you actually sit down and even do the numbers on the back of the envelope, you know, that you could have taken the money out back and burned it and had the same impact on the climate. But,
yeah, that's not exciting. Like thinking of how we're burning through capital, you know, at maybe an unprecedented rate. You know, and so one of the things is like that's a, you know, from the policy side, how do we fix that? You know, like that's, like when we're framing these problems, when I'm framing these problems, I'm like kind of overwhelmed with the amount of inertia they're going to need to change, you know, to get to the point where we're on common grounds, you know, for, you know, common good in that sense. Like where do you think the action is?
I think we first have to realize this is way bigger than governments. And we got to stop looking at the government to fix the problem for us. They're not going to do that. They've never had such a large problem before. You know, it has to be solved sustainably, almost from the bottom up, grassroots, everywhere. You know, not just sitting around waiting for the oil company lobbyists to get some policy through in Washington which will benefit their companies. You know, the whole idea that somehow the government is going to pay for it, or the government's taxpayers are going to pay for it. There's 40 billion tons of CO2 coming at it. You know, if the government's going to pay $100 a ton, 100 times 40 billion is a really big number.
Yeah.
There's not enough money out there to incentivize people or pay people not to mitigate, not to pollute, not to put out CO2. It has to be driven by a sustainable economic base. And so at Blue Planet, we think what we're doing really is one of the ways to do that. There's 5 billion tons of rock mined every year. Sorry, I mean 50 billion tons of rock mined every year. Most of it's limestone. So, you know, if you actually took advantage, that whole market is already in place. There's already mechanisms to move and store the material, you know, in concrete, and we really believe that we're pushing a solution that's global.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, you know, to have the global perspective, but then, you know, for the younger people, the students, have the local action, you know, to where the 21st century, you know, sustainable workforce, you know, we need to have a whole new set of skills, you know, that maybe the previous generations, you know, may not have had access to, you know, or maybe have thought about. You know, because I have a drone, you know, a film drone, and I'll put it up at the busy times, you know, on the 101, the 202, the 17, and to see lines of cars. And I can only imagine the same thing in California, and think of when it gets to stop traffic, the emissions that are just, you know, you're just sitting in, you know, and I'm like, oh, like this is a definite problem. And, you know, when we got saguaros falling down in June or July and August, I mean, that's a keystone indicator species that is heat adapted. And if the desert's not cooling down at night and they're essentially suffocating, you know, we're suffocating. If the saguaros are suffocating, we're suffocating. You know, and so it's so important to bring the context and to the space and the place that I can escape the heat in the summer, but some people have to, live here full time. Like usually as a snowbird from North Dakota, we used to escape the winters, to come to the nicer places. And now it's getting to the point where you have to escape the summers here because they're so hot and it's so long, up until October 19th or 17th this year, 104. And then last week, 92. So this is exponentially speeding up. Like to where it used to be decade scale, or even century scale, temperature changes. And so without, trying to say, be panicked or, like the urgency is here. And so how do we make these things happen, Eusebio? How do we get after it?
Again, I might sound like a broken record, right? The first thing we need to is understand really what's happening, and translate that understanding into action, right? And I think, if you look at, there is basically two things we can do. One is negative, which means we capture and we place somewhere. The other one's, what are you talking about, is cutting, right? Yep. But again, I think like the work that Jennifer does is really about thinking first is understanding, but also engaging. You talk the importance of communities and in part of the action there. If you don't have, this engagement piece, if you don't actually make in a way that everybody is a co-owner or a co-stakeholder of it, and of course, you have to be in a situation where you can afford to think about those things, right? So one of the things when you think in a global scale and you think about, making, I think was a great points that Brent was actually bringing to say, you have to make this, viable. I agree 200% with you that if we want to make this industry based on subsidies, it won't happen, right? It may happen in a very short scale time until, the wind changes and money goes somewhere else. So we need to think about how it creates value, how we engage into people, how actually we can have a clear understanding of what are you actually buying on this, what actually is happening, how are you engaged. So to me, it's basically, if you don't have a high level of resource orchestration into how we produce, we consume, how we live, we won't be able to address the issues that should have happened 30 years ago. That's a great point.
Yeah, as Crow would put it, heroic sustainability. So I'll do the last question for Jennifer because Brent, you got a keynote here coming up here soon. But if you had to scale the urgency or rate the urgency from a 1 to a 10, what would you say the urgency of climate actions or adaptation is at here in Phoenix? And then I'll give you the answer that the chief scientist from Desert Botanical Gardens gave too.
I don't like these questions. It's a hard one to answer because there's just so many factors, and like Eusebio says, there's a lot of data out there, but has it been turned into knowledge to be able to act on it and answer a question like that? I'm not sure, and I try to not, I really try not to generalize this issue. Right. So I might just not answer your question because it is so complex when we're talking about the entire climate change problem, how it affects people, how communities need to adapt, where does mitigation fit into the equation of this all, and what can we do right now to actually protect people's lives. I mean, we can talk about certain aspects of the climate system and how it affects our people, plants, and animals in different ways, and then I could maybe answer your question. Yep. But it's just too complex to give one number to it, and I don't think it's doing justice to how complicated the issue is. I think that for a lot of this, if we envisioned our city right now, and we had a world where climate change didn't exist, would air pollution still be a problem? Yes. Would heat still be a problem? Yes. Would water resources still be a problem? Yes. When we put climate change on top of that, they all become exacerbated issues. And so I try to not make it just about the fact that the climate is changing, but about the fact that we live in a region that experiences certain extremes, or we live lifestyles that pollute the atmosphere. That's part of the problem, and I don't want to make the whole problem about climate change. The same way people who live in Houston face hurricanes every year. And the only thing that's changing about that is they're becoming more intense. And so a lot of this, there's lots we need to do, there's lots of actions we need to take now, but for different reasons. And I think we need to make sure that our reasons for taking action are correct. And it doesn't need to only be that the climate is changing to take action. It can just be that we live in a really hot desert and there are thousands of people on the street without housing. What's the root cause of that? That's actually causing people to be exposed to 110 degrees Fahrenheit for 31 days straight in July. What's the root problem? And if we say the problem is the changing climate, we've missed everything, right? So I really push that kind of thinking when we ask those questions to the root problem. And then, I mean, solutions come in with a lot of this, and there's no silver bullet to any of this, so we've got to all be collaborating together with different companies, entrepreneurs, academics, communities, and so forth. So.
No, I appreciate that answer. You know, that was a great answer, and the great wrap up for the conversation is that, yeah, root cause, you know, analysis and getting into the cultural fabric, you know, is critically important. So let's give it a round of applause for our panel here.